It was a long time coming, but the first wave of Chinese cars has crashed onto Australian shores. There's another huge swell building out the back. Yes, it's time to strap in for another edition of the CarsGuide podcast, the show that takes you beyond the test drive. This is episode 197, China's New Generation. I'm CarsGuide Deputy Editor James, and joining me to discuss this seismic shift in the Aussie automotive landscape is CarsGuide Adventure Editor Crafty.
Morning.
And key contributor Steve.
Greetings.
We'll shine a light into distant recesses of the CarsGuide garage, looking back on our hero cars and memorable drives. Then we'll dive into your feedback. YouTubers, if you want to plot your own adventure, you can jump ahead courtesy of the time codes in the notes below, and you can click on the chapter markers in the timeline. So let's hit the start button. Well, the thing that was the catalyst for this is we've been running stories during the week, and they all added up to a well, gee, it's happening again. It took forever the first time around. There was this impending sense of, boy, China's going to have an impact on the Australian car market because they're producing product at a certain price point with a certain level of equipment, which is pretty impressive. And MG, then it finally happened. MG established itself and has become a major player in the top 10 regularly in terms of sales. Others, the ute market, SUVs, the whole lot. And it feels like there's another lot that's about to be headed our way that could make an even greater impact. And the first one is GWM Tank 600. And Crafty, you're only saying that, in Australian parlance, tank isn't necessarily a great thing, but it doesn't look like a tank to me. It's a pretty handsome vehicle. People on YouTube will have some pics up. Do you agree?
Yeah, no, it's a good looking thing. It's a good looking thing. And these things, I mean, like we were saying before the podcast, these things have improved. They're in another universe to what they started out as in terms of everything, drivability, safety, the standard features you get, the things you can do.
Build quality.
With these vehicles, build quality is most importantly. They are eons better than what they used to be. Pretty good bang for your buck. And for a lot of people, they make a real appealing proposition. When you look at, the dual cab ute market or the SUV market here, where things are getting so expensive, that offering people some sort of variety and some sort of variety at a price point is a good thing. Yes,
and this, I should say that this Great Wall Tank 600, it's the first official images that we're putting up, and it's due to be revealed at the Chengdu Motor Show. So toward the end of this month, and we've only got a week or so left, maybe less. So it's about to be released. It's a petrol-powered rival, but it's really Prado focused. 3-litre turbocharged V6, 260 kilowatts, 500 Newton meters, 9-speed auto. So in terms of the layout, it's got a lot going for it. Steve, do you think it's going to be competitive?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously, I think the big thing with Chinese cars at the moment is price and positioning. I think that's really where this, like I said, this sort of first generation of Chinese cars that have hit the mark, like MG, is just due to, I think, clever price and positioning. They've come into the market, undercut what we've previously expected from, as Crafty was saying, we've seen like the Japanese have moved up, the Koreans have moved up, and it's left a gap in the market for like MG3 is an affordable first car because there's very few affordable city cars now. It's like, look at the 20 Yaris now. It's you're not getting much change out of $30,000 for a Yaris, as opposed to, spending 15, under 20. So I think, if the tank can be priced well, like I wouldn't be surprised to see a few people, if you can't squeeze, you can't stretch the budget to a Land Cruiser, which, they're not cheap cars.
Well, I mean, also, yes, there's cheap and nasty, there's cheap and cheerful, and there's cheap and good value. And when you think about the conversation we had off air just a little while ago, our first experiences with a Chinese vehicle, mine was a Great Wall, I think it was the Ute, might have been the SUV, I'm not sure, but one of our colleagues, because the importer at that point was so reluctant to get the car out into the hands of journos, he kind of gathered the budget together, convinced his seniors that that'd be a good idea, and bought one. and various people had the chance to drive it. And I remember at the time, so it might have been 2013, something like that.
It was around then. Well,
and to me, it felt like a 2 generations old Pajero. So it must have been the SUV, sorry. And it just felt like,
it was the SUV. Yeah,
it's like I've driven this car before, but it was some time ago. It wasn't necessarily badly built. It was just the way it felt and the way it presented.
Well, certainly, I also remember that car. And so the interesting thing with that is it was actually quite difficult to sell because they were throwing them away. They were giving them away because they just didn't have anything near that. They had huge question marks over the brand. And in some ways, we're talking about sort of a second generation. That was almost like a preliminary run. Like it was almost like a recce for the certain brands. I remember before that driving I think it was the Cherry J1. My kids always like to ask me, what's the worst car you've ever driven? And I say, look, I try to really remember. There's not that many bad cars. And then I remember the Cherry J1, and I was just like, that was terrible. I mean, it was gutless.
Yeah.
Like none of the plastics match. You'd have a curved element of the lid on the center console, but then it'd have like a flat top. And you're like, none of this.
And isn't that interesting? I mean, we're light years away from that now.
Yeah,
that is ancient history, but it's not all that long ago, really.
No, that's I think the impressive thing about the Chinese car industry is how quickly they've evolved. Like if you look, we're talking about 10 years ago. Yeah, just maybe slightly over 10 years ago, and you look at the tank and some of the other cars we'll talk about, like they are. Maybe they're not as good as what we've come to expect from, I guess, the more established brands, but they're not far behind.
And the value equation tends to add up when you look at what you're presented with and what you're asked to pay. It's not a bad equation.
Yeah, so I think that is the key to MG's success in Australia. It took me a while to actually drive one because there does seem to be, it can be a little tricky with these cars. I think there is a sense from the car makers themselves that, what have we really got here?
Yeah.
But when you're driving, I've driven a few of the MGs now, like the ZS and the HS. Are they class leading cars? No. Are they below average? Maybe. Like maybe they're probably class average or slightly below average in terms of quality, and particularly the driving experience. Like as we've come to expect from particularly brands like Hyundai and even Toyota in recent years, where they've improved with TNGA. To make their cars nicer to drive. They're a little bit behind that, but they present well. They're not, they don't have that mismatched plastic inside. I think those new MGs, they look all right inside.
Yeah.
They're fairly generic. They don't really have a bold look to them. Like, the tank certainly does, but like the MGs are fairly sort of, homogenous, and they appeal.
It's interesting you mentioned, giving them away in the early days. I think that's primarily because Crafty had been engaged as a consultant, and that was his marketing strategy, was to establish the car park by actually giving the cars away. But Crafty, you've experienced some LDVs and some other Chinese vehicles. What's your take in terms of how they stack up currently?
I think Stephen's spot on. I think they've been really clever. Like, I think China has watched the evolution of Toyota and other, Japanese car makers, Korean car makers. They've been watching all this happen, and they've compressed the time frame in which those countries and companies, took for them to develop it, and they've really ramped it up, and it's and it's at pace now. And again, years ago it was difficult to enjoy the driving experience in them because you never felt safe, you never felt comfortable. Bits were really sort of, they were hanging on by a thread almost. There probably was thread behind there somewhere, but
yes, it might have been silk.
Yeah, that's right. And and it's the same with things like Mahindras and that sort of thing. It was hard to get hold of one to test. And it was even more difficult to enjoy. And usually there's something positive to find about a vehicle, no matter what. But often they were very positive.
It feels to me like there was a shift. I don't know when that threshold was actually passed, but a shift from producing what was just another commercial object. You know, it might have been white goods, or it might have been, it just happened to be a car, to bringing in people with experience to transform it into something that is more recognizable as a drivable, practical car. You know what I mean? They've changed their attitude in terms of what a car is.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think that's actually, it's funny you say that. I was just thinking, you know, one of the big things that the Chinese car industry has done in the last few years is hire out of Europe. You know, you see a lot of now European designers and engineers, and you know, I think it was probably no accident that you know, not to get too controversial, but the whole Volkswagen emission scandal, you know, when they had to jettison some of their key engineers, then I don't think it was you know, I think they sort of saw it as a necessity to give some of these people the golden handshake, so they wouldn't get, you know, lured to China with a big contract. Because you know, if you get the architect of, you know, Volkswagen's, you know, modular platforms, and you send him to China and you give him a budget, like, you know, like,
yes, I've been here before. I might have a few ideas.
Yeah. So, you know, if you've got the capital behind him to, you know, go and implement a plan like that, it's going to shortcut them, you know, enormously. So totally. I think that's true. But like I said, I mean, I think that's the other funny thing. You know, you mentioned the idea of them moving from, you know, building, whether it be white goods or whatever it was. But that was the Chinese car industry for a very long time.
Totally. Totally.
It was like the start of the, you know, the American car industry, or the, you know, the European car industry, you know, like Peugeot used to make salt and pepper grinders.
Exactly.
You know, like, well, like it was.
I mean, the thing is, it's not for the first time I've thought that. I reckon Japan took a while to get up to speed, because culturally there was a need to do things ourselves. Like we must do this ourselves. We're not going to have outsiders come in and teach us what to do. We're going to develop it. And I think the Korean industry looked at that and went, we can do this faster. Let's just get the good people, hire them, and we're there in an instant. And I think the Chinese industry has watched that and said, absolutely, that's the way to go. We'll get whoever we need.
And you know, and to be fair, like, credit where it's due, you know, companies, you know, like Toyota and Nissan and Hyundai have carved the trail for these Chinese brands. They've laid down a plan. They've said, hey, you do this, this, and this in the Australian market, and you will have success. And so that's again another reason why they've been able to shortcut.
I think they've made a YouTube video that you can follow. It's very easy. It's like a tutorial. This is how to succeed.
It's how to unbox
unboxing. But just to get back to the product, Crafty, we touched on LDV, and one of the more interesting models for them has been the T60, and it's getting a bit of a freshen up with some interior upgrades and what have you. But it's also going to be the most powerful 4-cylinder dual cab ute on the market by the time it gets here. So it's set to put the frighteners, you know, on HiLux and Ranger, or that's who it's got in its sights. What do you think? It's hard to see the two at the top of the pyramid being worried at all, but 160 kilowatts, 400 Newton meters, 2-litre twin turbo diesel, puts it ahead of HiLux on power and Ranger. Not torque, it's line ball, but still, if you're a tradie and you want a work truck, it's going to be a pretty appealing proposition, don't you think?
Yeah, and a whole lot cheaper too. You've got to remember that. I mean, if you're buying a work truck or a small fleet for a small business or something, that's very attractive. I've spent a lot of time in T60s. Obviously, not this new thing that they're talking about, but you know, it's a decent steerer, a pretty decent off road, pretty comfortable on road. Not a whole lot of sort of real hardcore negative things to say about it, and pretty good value for money. I don't think the top tier companies or variants would be concerned. I think it's more your mid-price ones and lower price ones, you know, because it'll rattle the cage and it could do a whole lot more than that. Like, you know, and I think the only problem with these sort of things, and again, we went through the phase of the Japanese, Korean, I think it's the stigma. People will go, well, maybe, you know, it might be cheaper, but it you know, maybe it's not as safe, or, you know, that sort of thing. And I think once you see a few of them around, and you already see, you know, a fair few of these things around, you know, once more and more out there and people see them more and more, then they won't think about, you know, that won't be so much of a
totally. Well, this new T60 is going to have a redesigned face, a different treatment on the tailgate, and inside you've got a new steering wheel, gear selector, center stack, all that kind of stuff, and it'll have a bit more tech. So step by step, trying to chip away.
Yeah.
Have you had much experience in the T60, Steve?
No, I haven't. That's like I say, that they can be a little challenging to drive some of these Chinese vehicles. So I haven't had a chance to have steer in a T60.
Yeah.
I might have to ask the question again, but certainly from, I was at the original launch of it locally, and just looking at it, it looks a well put together, ute for what it is. Like I think Crafty's right. I think it's probably not going to worry Toyota and Ford. Yeah. But certainly, your Nissan and Mitsubishi, particularly the Triton, it's probably taking aim at those kind of more affordable.
It's interesting you say that, because early on in the MG 2.0, when MG arrived for a little while and then disappeared and came back in a much more forceful way, they were reluctant to let journos drive the product. Obviously, you can only assume that was nervousness around how they might be reviewed.
Yes.
But our own Matt Campbell used a friend in the trade, as they say, a dealer that actually wanted to sell even more cars. Just left one parked outside. You might want to have a drive of that, which was a brilliant move. And his first response was, "Look, they got nothing to be scared of. This is a perfectly acceptable car. There's no need to be nervous about this."
No, that's why I say I've driven ZS and HS MGs.
Yeah,
and they're fine. Like I say, they're probably they're maybe even slightly below class average. I mean, but that's only because the quality of those segments is so high. We are now, I'm driving a Hyundai Tucson at the moment, and it's an impressive car, so to compare the HS to it, or to a RAV4 or to a CX5, that's a big ask. But, compared to, say, I think where MG especially has had good fortune in this market is they've sort of been able to take almost Mitsubishi's position, where Mitsubishi for the last few years has been able to sell on price.
Yeah.
And now they're able to compete evenly, or even maybe slightly undercut them. MG can undercut them on price whilst being a bit newer and a bit fresher and a bit different, So that's where I think they've had that big, and let's be honest, I mean, MG is basically it's a top 10 brand now.
And they're nifty looking little cars and SUVs. There's nothing to be worried about there. They look the part. So that's a big part of it as well.
Well, they're also, if everything we've talked about are cars in the right segment. We've talked about a Land Cruiser rival, a Hilux rival, compact SUV, a mid-size SUV, and then an affordable sort of new city car. These are all the segments they should be, they're not coming in with something,
a sedan.
Mid-size sedan. That's what they had originally,
it's true.
And they were not good. It was the wrong car at the wrong time.
Well, the next one up, it adds another dimension or another layer to all of this. In the Great Wall Havel, we're familiar with the H6, but the H6S is a electrified car. So it's taking aim at Toyota RAV4 hybrid, and it's a petrol electric hybrid. So that's the next frontier as well, isn't it? To get into those blended powertrains and full electric, and there's no holding back on that either.
No. I mean, I've driven, again, to go back to MG, like the ZS EV. It's fine. Is it again, it's got that lower driving range and all that sort of stuff, because it's a slightly older technology on the battery, but it's the most affordable electric car you can buy, and it does the job. If you're just running around the city, it'll do the job. So I think, there's no, I don't think there's anything particularly technical that's going to hold that industry back. I think,
this H6S, it's a 1.5 litre turbo 4 petrol electric motor in series hybrid setup, and the combination produces 179 kilowatts and 530 newton meters. And it's going to be aiming up at the MG HS PHEV, and that's 47,990 drive away. So it's going to probably undercut that car, or at least be line ball. So yes, that's not an insubstantial amount of money. but for a plug-in hybrid, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
And to come up with the affordable EVs, I mean, if your point of difference is affordability and without sacrificing too much in the way of everything else, then by geez, here, I mean, in the future,
and sorry, not plug-in hybrid, just in series hybrid setup. Sorry about that. Okay, and look, just one more, which is probably carrying on the fine tradition of fairly oddball names, and this is a more distinctive looking vehicle, the Great Wall Haval Cherry Cat, and it's actually going to be, internationally marketed under a sub-brand called Aura. So we're talking the Aura Cherry Cat. Challenging name if you're on the showroom floor trying to move these out the door. I have sympathy for you. So it's a small.
I'm not having to say that name 20 times a day.
If you follow me over here, I can show you the Aura Cherry Cat. Yeah. Yes, okay, we'll be.
You might just end up shouting across the showroom floor. That thing over there.
Yeah. That thing over there is a small SUV. It's a long-range new battery type. It's going to again fight the MG ZS EV, Hyundai Kona electric. It's their Aura sub-brand. It could be the brand's first EV in Australia, and it shares its underpinnings and basically its dimensions with the Jolion. So interesting, 150 kilowatts, 340 Newton meter electric motor, and you can have the option of front or all-wheel drive, loaded with equipment. So it's headed our way as well. And they're working on some breakthrough battery technology. So it's not just mimicking existing product, it is actually developing new tech at the same time. So it's all on.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's funny you say that though, because that actually does bring up a point that, with the Chinese industry in general, particularly up until now, and even with, some of the cars we talked about today, there's no doubt that the tank designers have looked at Land Cruisers quite closely.
Might have had a passing glance at it. Yeah.
But Aura does build that, or they're planning to build effectively a Volkswagen Beetle.
Yes, that's right. It's a different. It's a different kind of cat, isn't it?
Alley cat or something.
Alley cat.
Yeah, who knows? But there was a period. You might remember this better than me, James. The Great Wall, Fiat accused Great Wall of basically copying the design, maybe for the Panda or something, and was actually trying to sue them for copyright in China.
Yeah.
And they were both imported by the same local distributor in Australia, which probably made for some awkward meetings.
Yes.
I mean, thankfully they're moving away from that, but I don't think they've completely abandoned that. Certainly not Aura hasn't. So
yeah, well, the I just had a look. The name for the VW Beetle, obviously inspired by the Beetle. Let's just say that is the Punk Cat. The Aura Punk Cat. There's an even more challenging one to
I not remember that?
Get across the line. So there's a bit of that strangeness out there still, which is a bit of fun. But they are experimenting with, sodium ion type batteries, which are less dense in terms of their ability to absorb and retain energy, but they charge much faster. So there's this balancing act between what's the best tech that's going to be most useful for consumers, which I think is an interesting area to get into as well.
For sure.
All right. Well, that's a great chat. Thank you, guys. It'd be great to hear what people watching and listening make of all that. Where do you stand? Do you own a Chinese drive car? What's your take on how they measure up currently? It'd be great to hear from you. But we're now going to move into our garage. Because COVID's got our hands tied behind our backs a little bit in various parts of Australia, we've adopted a new approach where we're thinking about memorable cars, places, drives that have stuck in our memory. And Steve, you've got a beauty. You've got a great one. Fill us in, please.
Yeah, well, I was sort of reminiscing, so to speak, on. Do you remember back in the old days when we used to leave Australia and do this thing called traveling?
Yes. Yes. Not even on ships. Sometimes it was on airplanes.
Yeah, there were those big metal birds. A couple of years watching the Olympics, basically the recent Tokyo Olympics, and specifically the cycling, the road cycling, where they went to Fuji Speedway. And it reminded me, a couple of years ago, I was very fortunate to go to Fuji Speedway with Lexus, because they wanted to show off their Super GT cars, which is a big Japanese, like their version of V8 supercars, and they're slightly more high tech. And we took a Lexus. We had an RCF and a GSF, and went up to a road called the Hakone Skyline, which is dubbed Japan's Nürburgring. You know, it's just this beautiful, like twisty, sinuous mountain road that basically runs along the top of a ridgeline, and it is absolutely stunning. Like, it's a brilliant road, beautiful scenery. Like, you can, on a clear day, we weren't there on a clear day, but apparently on a clear day you can see Mount Fuji. But it was just fantastic.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Steve, because I've been there a couple of times, and I wrote a story. I think it was Motor Magazine used to have great drives, and I did a little bit of research. It's a tollway now, and there are 3 different drives, and it's a bit like Tokyo's pressure release valve, where the cops kind of turn a blind eye, and you go there, pay your toll, and have a mad crack, and no one really worries too much. The only thing is, around there, it's a hot springs kind of place, and you'll get sightseers dawdling along the road, like looking at the view, the oldies that have been in the onsen, you know, the therapeutic waters, and you'll come around a corner, it's like, whoa, they're there. But as you're coming out of Tokyo, going towards Hakone, the closer you get, the more you notice, there's a guy on a full cafe race bike with scratch pads on his elbows and knees. Where's he going? Oh, look at that. There's a high performance. There's GTRs everywhere. What's going on? You're headed to that drive.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing for me is even like before you get to particularly the way we approach, before you get to the toll booth, we came up this like equally fantastic road that just basically, it was just like constant switchbacks almost, this beautiful sort of snaking road that climbed up under the trees and everything.
Unreal.
And as you get to the top, there's some wider corners, these wider sort of large, corners that come back around on themselves, absolutely painted in rubber. Like, there is just, it is clearly, and apparently the story goes, that's a huge drifting spot, Turgay, the original sort of drifting, street drifting. So not that we would encourage.
So it's nicely rubbered in. And you can set a very good time.
It's unbelievable. Like, it's just all of a sudden, it's like going to a drag strip.
It's unreal.
There's just rubber all over the road.
And occasionally you just see carnage. It's a bit like I've been my car in the Nasher. It's someone. I remember seeing an old MG went backwards off into the scenery and whatever. It's also just it's a beautiful country to drive around. That was a particularly great driving experience, like going. Unreal. We drove through Tokyo, just that hustle and bustle of Tokyo, which was an eye-opening experience in and of itself. And then you get out and that's, I think, the thing, if you haven't traveled to Japan, is it is a great sort of road trip country, because once you get out of these, like, you think of Japan as these mega cities, but once you get out of them, it's beautiful. Like, it's beautiful and green and lush and they have these amazing roads. It's scattered all over the place. Funny you talk about driving in Japan, because I remember going. It was Nissan. We went with Nissan, and we were driving actually to Hakone and to watch a touring car race at that stage at Fuji, and we were going to have a fang at Hakone as well. And we were in these cars, GTIR Pulsars, and 180SXs, and all these amazing cars. And these Aussie journos were carving up the traffic, just carving it up. And, Japanese people are so polite in life and on the road, and the etiquette is exemplary. So I was last in the chain, and I'd go past these cars, and you look across at people that had just been destroyed by these Aussie journos, and they had this look on their face like, what just happened? That was pretty funny. Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. And the surface of the road is like hot mix on a race circuit. It's so beautifully smooth.
Yeah, it's fantastic. But I mean, I have to. I know this isn't a motorsport podcast, but I'd be, mad at myself if I didn't mention it. The Super GT race at Fuji Speedway, just amazing. Like, the cars there are so high tech. They're like spaceships on the ground, but they just had this huge eclectic mix. And my favorite was a mid-engined V8 powered Toyota Prius.
Fantastic.
That's just
I love that.
like the freedom they give.
I love that.
Like just going, I'm pretty sure that wasn't stock. I don't think they sell it.
No, it wasn't a factory option.
Yeah,
We'd love it to be. Love it to be. Now, Crafty, speaking of Prius, you were out in country where there are plenty of those. They're thick on the ground. Tell us about your memorable drive.
Well, I'm not going to spoil your drive yarn, JC, but suffice to say, sandwiched between you and Stephen, my yarn's probably a little bit more sedate and a little bit more closer to home. This is about my most recent trip, just before things ramped up as they have now. So probably the last piece of substantial sort of freedom in terms of a long distance drive that I've had. I drove from Sydney to Bourke, out through the Blue Mountains and Lithgow and up to Dubbo and out to Bourke and out to a couple of camping grounds out that way.
Would they actually be in the back of Bourke? You probably were in the back of Bourke.
Yeah.
Nice.
I think the locals got sick of me, saying the joke. I'm sure they got sick of everyone saying the joke, which is probably why I got bashed. No.
Yeah, nice. Not for the first time.
Yeah, not for the first.
You're a well-known brawler.
That's right. But anyway, an awesome trip. Obviously, the scenery changed once I was out past Dubbo and Bourke there. Unreal, red dirt. Very lush. There'd been a bit of recent rain. I'll throw a few images up behind me. I went out with a good mate of mine, Glenn Sullivan of Sullyvision, who's a videographer and photographer extraordinaire. So we had a good couple of days. We had to do it pretty fast because of vehicle availability and that sort of thing. We took a camper trailer, but I'm a bit old school and so is he. So we had swags. We didn't even put the camper trailer up.
Yeah, right. It's pristine and you guys are sleeping in swags next to it.
That's too posh.
Carry one.
That's like Croc Dundee sleeping next to the bed in the hotel in Manhattan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it was really sort of about a long distance test. We're in a Nissan Navara Pro 4X, and we had the camper trailer along just as a towed load, just to see how it'd go over corrugations and sort of chopped up backcountry roads and that sort of thing. But an awesome trip, some great photos, great experience, good company. Don't tell Glenn I said that. But yeah, and just the freshest in my mind in terms of being able to go just before we started experiencing.
Did you during that trip? Did you have a sense of impending kind of restriction, or it was still a bit in a question mark?
Yeah, no, it was still we were still living the good life. I mean, this was a good couple of weeks before things
went south.
But yeah,
fabulous. I mean, and when you're out there, you can start to get that big sky feeling too, can't you? That full horizon, 360 degrees. It's fabulous, and the night sky and
absolutely
all of that. So great.
And I was also stoked because we saw so much wildlife like emus and kangaroos and just everything. And like I said, there'd been a little bit of rain, so it was probably a little bit greener than what it generally is.
Was there enough time for the rain to have caused populations to kind of grow? The roos go out of control and they're everywhere.
I think there was a little bit of activity off the back of it, and there are a couple of little crossings that were pretty full, a lot fuller than the last time I'd been out that way. So that was good though.
Fabulous,
good part of the country.
It is indeed. Yeah. Now I'll just finish things up by I had the opportunity in I want to say it was the late 1980s, and BMW has a thing called Mobile Tradition where they have their collection, but it's not always on static display. They sometimes group. They just go to the toy box and choose different cars. They're all on the button, ready to drive. And for particular groups, you can go out and drive these cars. And it was a media group I was a part of, and I had the chance. Well, first I had the chance to drive a E30 M3 Evo. And I'd never driven that car. That was pretty special. But even more special was a 507. So For people that don't know, the 507 was like a late 50s model. It was a small capacity overhead valve of all things, V8, not massively powerful, but beautiful to look at. Front engine, rear wheel drive, 4-speed manual. And it was meant to be a big seller in the USA. It was going to be BMW's big step into a glamorous model to set them up image-wise in the US, thousands sold each year. It turned out to be very expensive to build because the body was alloy body, had the alloy engine. They ended up building 252 of them, full stop. That was
so
it.
Not thousands then?
Not thousands,
slightly
no.
Less. Okay.
No, slightly less. They just realized this is sending us broke. It actually put the company on the edge of bankruptcy, this move. But what it did create was a very glamorous Roadster and very few of them. So it's become a hugely desirable classic collector car. And here I was having the chance to drive it. And I was with a fellow journo, David Robertson, and we were just outside Munich. We were in this car and got lost. We got comprehensively lost. But it was a beautiful sunny spring day, and we were two blokes in a convertible, just doing our thing through the canola fields. And it was absolutely fantastic. I did a bit of digging. They're worth around $5 million now. Jesus. So it was in the same time as your 300 SL Roadster from Merc, which was obviously a supercar of the time. It wasn't quite at that level, but it was to fill that gap.
Yeah,
one tier back from that. Elvis Presley famously bought one when he was serving in the US military in Germany. And the factory carried out a restoration on that car reasonably recently. And we also drove a 502 sedan, which was the same engine, but I think one less carburetor and, detuned a bit. But it had a column shift, V8, but column shift. It was just an absolutely great day. But I think the highlight was that 507. They had talk about motorsport, Steve. They had a 328 Mille there, which you could hear from roughly, the next postcode away. It didn't get anywhere near driving that, which is probably a good thing. But it was just a great day.
For the young people who maybe don't understand what a 507, correct me if I'm mistaken, that was the inspiration for the Z8. Right?
Totally.
Like that was when we say that's a retro sports car, it was retro because it was sort of inspired by the 507.
Yeah. So I think within BMW, the 507 is seen as a glorious folly. It was, we gave it a really good shot. We loved the car. It just didn't work out for various reasons. And things like that chrome flash on the front fender with a BMW roundel and then little vents behind it, that was pretty much taken off and put on to the Z1. It became the design inspiration for that car, no doubt.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah. No, it was good. It was good. All right. So let's get into the feedback. Now, Steve, this was all about one of your stories last week, and it's
good to hear.
It had created a lot of buzz.
I trust it's all positive feedback.
There's love in the air. There's love in the air, and it's not about the story. It's just about you. And
good.
Yeah. But we were dealing with concept cars that should have been built. Just what a crying shame it was that these cars, for whatever reason, weren't built. Now, the hero in all of this was Holden's concept, the TT36 Tirana, which brought back that amazing nameplate. And Salty Dog 889 said the designers of that Tirana had obviously never seen a Tirana. And that was a kind of a strange one to work out until Birdie chimed in and said, correct. This design appeared to have a roomy interior and a boot. The LH to LX Tirana may be legendary due to racing heritage and styling, but was cramped. And he adds, it was no Centura. And wow, that's putting a car down if it can't measure up to a Chrysler Centura. One of the all-time greats of the Aussie motoring landscape. But Lofty Visions chimed in with one that I thought absolutely, another one from Holden, but it was the Coupe 60 from 2008. He says another one that got away sadly, which was essentially a VE-based Monaro. Yeah. It was such a great looking car. I totally agree with him. If that Monaro thing had continued on, it was a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I mean, this was obviously that era of Holden just riding high. You know, they had money to burn, so to seemingly, and they were experimenting, and you know, I think all of it though, all of these cars goes back to the coupe concept, which became the Monaro. The fact that was so well received, like, emboldened Holden to make these crazy concepts. I mean, yeah, most of them, apart from like Effigy, which was obviously fantastic, but
yeah. It wasn't close to production ready.
I don't think that was. I don't think so. No, but like, yeah, Coupe 60 was would have been great for the Monaro to come back again, so to speak. But
yeah,
you know, as we've seen with coupes, they're just not. You know, it's such a hard business case to make. So understandable. But you know, yeah, I think the Tirana was Tirana, I think, was, you know, maybe it didn't quite adhere to the spirit of the original in the sense that of design in practicality, but it was kind of, at least it wasn't retro. It was trying to be a modern version of
it was really leaking a lot of Commodore stuff out there too, wasn't it? You know, it was the interior, and let's see what people make of this. So it was a nice test bed in that regard. Yeah. All right. Well, the oddly named Piri, aka Track Wrecker, came at us with some feedback. We'd been talking about just the most. Chesto, a couple of episodes ago, posed the question. We'd talk about classic, brilliant cars, E-types and others that have stood the test of time and still stand as beautiful cars today. Where do you stand on that? He came in with the Lamborghini Asterion. Now, you may remember this one. He says it's the best-looking Lambo since the Countach, and yet they didn't make it. He says the rear three-quarter angle was a ripper, and I had to wrap my brains. I do remember it. Asterion. Now, it was a plug-in hybrid, so it had 5.2-litre V10 mid-mounted, but then two motors on the front axle, and it made 910 horsepower, so 669 kilowatts. It'd do 0 to 100 in 3 seconds. And I remember it at the time thinking, I just don't know about the look of it. It had a bit of Mura to it. It almost looked like it should have been front engine from the proportions. And I thought, I don't know whether that's on target. But Piri reckons it was right on the money, and particularly that rear three-quarter view. So for people on YouTube, see what you make of it. But I do remember the car in period. And at the time, a plug-in hybrid was pretty exotic. And it seemed like Lamborghini trying to put a stake in the ground, like we're headed for a more environmentally friendly future.
Well, which they are now.
Well, they are, but it just felt like a little bit ahead of its time.
But yeah, I remember. I've just Googled it. It is actually. I think it's a stunning car. You know, it has got. It's sort of a. You know, like the interesting thing with Lamborghini is their most famous cars are the Mura and the Countach, arguably, that are polar opposites in terms of car design. One is that sort of very sleek and stylish sort of 60s supercar, and the other is that, you know, angular wedgy
Lunar Rover.
But that's what they've gone with for the whole rest of their, you know, existence up until now. And so the Mura almost stands out as an oddity, simply because it's not like all the other ones.
But Crafty, they also had that LM002. Do you remember that thing? That the big balloon tighter was initially going to be, it was for a military tender, and Lamborghini put their hat in the ring, and they put the V12 engine from the Countach into the front of it, and it was an off-road beast, you know, pre-Hummer kind of Hummer. They didn't win the tender, but they sold some privately. Has that ever come into your consciousness?
Well, I've not had a steer, JC.
No, right.
Because I believe you've got a couple, though. Yeah,
I don't think
in the shed.
I think roughly three people in the world have had a steer, I'd say.
I'm not allowed in anything, you know, over 25 grand, JC. So,
okay, good. All right, Will. Now, continuing on, Hammer had another two bobs, because Mal, his memorable drive last week was when he and a couple of his cronies got in a charade 10 years ago and drove from Sydney to Perth as quickly as they could.
Of course.
And Hammer reckoned that would be a great adventure, albeit a fast one. I'd love to do something similar. And Russell Dines worked out that this cross-country run averaged 104 kilometres an hour. So they would have been in suburban areas for a little while, and I think across the middle there, you're limited to 100 Ks. So they've done very well.
Mm.
And our old mate Bertie, who has an eagle eye for car and auto advertising in general, said, "Charade, the car the computer created is here." All right, that's obviously an advertising positioning line, and sure enough, it is. And I dug out the ad for people on YouTube to see the car the computer created. I don't know whether you want to hang your hat on that, but
no.
Artificial intelligence, when it would have been worryingly unintelligent, creating a car like that. But anyway, thank you for all that feedback. We always look forward to whatever you've got to say, good, bad, and ugly. And with that, though, we have reached the finish line of today's show. So I want to say thank you, Steve.
My pleasure.
And thank you, Crafty.
Thank you, JC.
And thanks to Brett Sullivan, covering production duties for Mr. Pritchard, who's at yet another family gathering, this time via Zoom. His grandfather, Percy Pritchard, turns 87 today, and Matt has sculpted an amazing likeness of him to mark the occasion. People on YouTube will be able to see that. He slipped me some photos so you could get a look. And it's great to see Brett getting into the Pritchard swing of things, donning his favourite Queen Elizabeth II outfit for today's show. I appreciate the effort, Brett, and it's a very regal look, very regal.
He cuts a fine figure.
He does. He turns his ankle very nicely in that skirt. So jump into the conversation. Cars Guide's on Facebook and Instagram. Email us at comments@carsguide.com.au if you prefer. Apple Podcast listeners, please take a moment to rate and review the show. 5 stars would be great. 5 stars would be brilliant. Thank you. And if you enjoyed the episode, make sure to subscribe to the Cars Guide YouTube channel, and you can stay on top of all our latest content. Tell your friends. But before we go, a photon pulls into the hotel forecourt, and the valet asks, "Can I help you with your luggage?" Photon replies, "I don't have any. I'm traveling light."